stop that, but I tell you what we'll do. We will make it a bit more exciting. I want you to not throw it. I want you to go all the way back to your seat.
Ritornate al tuo posto. Poco más. Poco más. Poco más. Un poco más. Sì. Mas no, sì. Dai. Ma spettacolare.
I want you to turn around and burn your mother. It's not your mother. Oh, sorry about it. Well, burn her anyway. It's fine. No, it's a joke! Gary, get back up here, quick. Just climb over the chairs. Come on. Come on up on stage. Nice and quick. You know what you got to do, right? No. Well, what the others did. Be strong. Straight up into my hand. Perfect! Give Gary a big round of applause. Uno. Más fuerte! Y más rápido! ¿Quieres más alto? Dime sí!
Yo tengo una caramela. Tú haces a la boca. Sí, yo soy estúpido, pero es mi trabajar, ¿eh? Allora. Hop. Oh. È normale, eh? Ok, Mercedes. Buon suerte. No, momento, no va, tira a te. Tu tira io tiro dos a te. Wow, professionale. Oh, 5. No. Voilà.
Let's get myself off mute. I think we are nearly ready to begin. Let's see. Hey, Lee, I think we've lost your video. Great beginning to the show, everybody. Lee, can I get you to turn your camera around? Yeah, we had this all sorted before. So, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Whining On. My name is Matthew Bowden, the incorrigible rogue, and today we have Lee Hayes. Lee, how you doing?
Good. Welcome, everyone.
So it's nice to see you. It's nice to chat. I've looked through your bio. We haven't met before this conversation, and it seems like you had really big influence on the European street performance scene. You helped organize festivals. You were there in the midst of the booming era.
Look, I reckon there was like a lot of lucky twists of fate of being in the right place at the right time, right? It was like right, because just before me, Django Edwards did this Festival of Fools in Amsterdam. And that was kind of the rebirth of street theater in Europe. Suddenly all this, creative stuff started coming out. And I landed in Amsterdam like a year after that, and I knew how to juggle, but I didn't know shit about performing. And within a few months, it's like I met people in Amsterdam that A led to B, led to C, led to D, and without actually planning it, was there at a lot of crucial moments as street theater grew from like the whole renaissance in the 80s to what it is today.
Well, let's drag it back. So what was your young life like, if you don't mind talking about it? What were you like as a young human being?
No, look, I grew up in the States, went to high school, went to college, studied photography. At uni, I learned how to juggle as a hobby, but I never thought of being myself as a juggler. I was studying photography, Graduated uni and wanted to go traveling and see the world. And a friend of mine said, oh, if you bring your juggling club to U-Boss, you can stand on the street corner in Europe and earn some coin and make your way like that, right? So I came to Europe in the early 80s. So I'm saying a year or two after Django did this Festival of Fools. And they ended up in Amsterdam. And I knew how to juggle really well, but I didn't know bugger all about performing. Right?
When did you learn to juggle? Did you already have this skill? Because your friend said take the clubs with you. So it's already a component of your life. Why?
No, okay. Look, when I went to university, you could take juggling as a phys ed class.
Okay.
All right, you're allowed to repeat it. So if you want to play basketball your whole uni career, you can do that. And I took juggling and just learned it, and ended up, me and two of my best mates, we ended up living in a house together, and we were just doing club passing all the time. You know, never did ball juggling.
There's that incredibly social thing about passing. Once you get up to the level of it.
We're just hanging out college, we did enough free time, we juggled, that's the way, you know, went to festivals on the weekend, whatever. So I graduated.
And were you involved in performance then? Or were you just doing it more socially?
I thought I would be a performer. I didn't, the only examples I had of jugglers in the time were like the flashy, gritty, Las Vegas, cruise ships, that I was like, nah, that's, you know, I was studying photography, juggling was my hobby.
Why didn't you identify with those kind of flashy cruise ship kind of kind of guys?
Look, it wasn't that. It was more at that time where I was in my life. We were talking where I was in, you know, university. Juggling was my hobby. Don't make your hobby your work. I had my profession. I was going to do that, and juggling was just my hobby. I hung out with my mates for a week, free time, and we juggled. Right?
So you'd never take something out to go and act or do a bit of stand-up or do it?
For pleasure. It was just fun. It was the way we killed time. It wasn't any idea about performing. You know, I didn't know, nothing had to do with growing up through my youth. There was no theater, no performing, and my parents, my family, there's none of that in my upbringing, right? You know, I grew up in New Jersey, typical, you know, suburb of New York City, expected to go to university, get a good job, you know, that sort of thing. And so, yeah, I just learned to juggle as a hobby, graduated, and what it more came down to is I've had the travel bug, all right? I'm not good at sitting still. And I wanted to travel, and that's when I said, oh, you know, you can stand on the street corner of Europe and juggle. So I showed up in Amsterdam in February.
How did you feel about that, having no performing kind of intuition at that time? What was your thoughts about going and doing shows?
No, my mind wasn't at shows at that point. I was going traveling. I had my juggling clubs in my backpack, you know, I was going to travel and discover the world. And so I ended up in Amsterdam. That's what I was going to say. Painted a white face, went on the street corner, and juggled with a hat in front of me. You know, I just practiced. I didn't know performing anything. I was just juggling on the street corner, right?
Yeah.
And then in Liza's Plan, I met this guy, Gino, who's not around
Did you make money juggling on the side when you were just trying to first get there?
Excuse me?
Did you juggle when you first got to Amsterdam, when you first got to Holland or Europe? Did you go and juggle on streets before you saw anybody else? Did you give it a go first?
No. I didn't know what the bugger I was doing. That's what I was about to explain, right? I showed up with a white face on a street corner with a hat in front of me, and I met this guy, Gino, this French guy of dubious background, became a great performer in his day. On Liza's Plane at night, and by that time I had gotten 3 torches, and I basically just light 3 torches, hold them above my head until the crowd backed off, do 1 burn, all my tricks, and put out my hat. And this guy Gino came along to me and he goes, man, you're a fucking good juggler, because the day there weren't that many on the street. You should have a crowd before you even light them torches. I said, yeah, I don't know how to do that. He says, watch this. And he got 5 balls of cotton, laid them out in a half circle, lit each 5 balls. There was people around. I did my same 1 burn, 3 minutes, and the hat was double. And I went to Gino like, hey, that was great. That was like a duo show. You got the crowd. I did the show. You know, let's split it 50-50. And he said, no, I don't want half your hat, mate, but I don't want to ever have to do this for you again. So the next day I went out and bought cotton swabs, right? And put them in a half circle. And that was my first show. I didn't know what I was doing. He was on Liza Plane in the early 80s. But just around that same time,
before we go on, how did you feel about it? What did you think of what you were doing then? Did you see it as being something you really took to from that first instance?
Look, I was alone in Amsterdam. I went on the streets. I juggled. I met people. Life started happening. The popcorn was popping. You know, it wasn't like I was out there to, you know, for the hat, the earning the money side of it. Well, that was paying my bills and my cinema. You know, it's like I had a normal job, and in the nights and the weekends, could go out and go on the streets. And within a year or 2, it became way more fun to go out and go on the streets than it was to go back to the normal job. So I quit the job and never looked back again. You know?
How did your craft change? How did you develop over that year to the point where you felt safe in going, right, this is a stable living?
That's what happened, because that's that magical, what I said at the beginning, all right? Faith that I was in the right place at the right time. Just within a month or so after I started, I'd only been in Amsterdam a couple months, walking through Fondel Park, I met a guy called Jos van Wees, who became Henry John, the stuntman, a very famous group here in Holland, who was there with 3 balls. And I was just like, wow, you juggle, let's juggle. And they had never even seen a real club before. They had like homemade balls, and that was it. And I could already, you know, juggle 4 clubs, 5 balls. I could juggle, you know.
And were they competent jugglers who'd learned just off this kind of...
They were 13, 14-year-old kids, right? Just in the park. And in that group became, well, there was the Van Wees brothers, who became Henry John the Stuntman, Michiel Hesseling, who became the Flying Dutchman, all right? Paul van Dijk, Frank van Dijk. There's this whole group of...
I remember Mikhail talking about it now, him saying in the park it was like the hangout, and it's like skateboarders nowadays. People hung out and juggled.
Yeah, and I came to Amsterdam, all right, and met this group of kids that were like hungry to learn how to juggle, and I knew how to juggle. Hooked up with Michiel really quick because Michiel is just a natural talent. Michiel Hesseling, by the way, for those who don't know, is Flying Dutchman.
He was described as the Mozart of juggling in his time, right? That he took to it so young and so capable.
Well, he could just see a trick once and do it, you know? But so anyway, Michiel and I, this was in the spring, I met those kids, right, in May. And partway through the summer, we got an interrail chick, right? And went to, like, we had a duo show, Michiel and me. And from May till I want to say that was July or August, those few months, I taught him everything I know, and he was better than me. And it was on that fateful interrail trip that in Geneva ran into Cotton, who you mentioned earlier, and Les Buck. All right? And so we suddenly saw them, and our eyes just went, boom. Besides the fact that in Lies of Plain, suddenly word had gotten out, and that was happening. And that was like the match that lit the fire that suddenly Amsterdam became a little sort of hub and mecca for street performers. There was this whole group of they had a squat, Michiel's sister and a few other people. And there could be anywhere from 5 to 20 people there at any given point in day during the summer. That any street performer showed up in Amsterdam was welcome to come there and have a sleep. And it just, suddenly there was all this internationality
community hub
on. And that's where it bloomed out of. That would have been like the mid-'80s. There was this connection between Amsterdam and Zurich, but that's when Amsterdam really was like kind of a booming street theater scene. There was something really happening.
Well, something interesting I think we'll touch upon later as well, and we talked a little bit about it before we actually began the interview, is change of circumstance for the world and people. May see that we don't see that kind of culture develop again for a long time. We don't have squats anymore in the same way we used to. I don't know how about in Holland, I don't know how it's working there, but here squatting is a full-time drudgerous activity to try and live and sustain.
Yeah, back in the day they found the squat, and the other thing, not only that, they found the squat with people who live in, but they also knew these people that had squatted the school. And so we had access to the gym 24/7. And on the ground floor, there was like an alternative cafe, and I think there was a radio station there. But basically, we met on the streets in the summer, and then the winter came to Amsterdam, and they had a gym we had access for 24/7. And it was all high school kids hanging out, you know. And so that was like that 10,000 hours or whatever that Bill Gates or Steve Jobs said. The fact that there were all these Amsterdam high school kids that were still high school living from, you know, they could practice 3, 4, 5, 6 hours a day. And it became this whole scene because there was a gym to hang out, and they had the squad, and there were other people from Israel and all these international people. And that's what kind of made Amsterdam this kind of, what you call it, growth hub, whatever you want to call it. You know?
And so the beginning of this was people starting to use the Lights of Plain and other places like this as pitches more regularly, some good guys coming through. It kind of instills an exuberance in the locals. And then at the same time as this squad opens up, it becomes a hub for traveling performers. And then the gym comes up, so it allows the people who are living in the area to really push the capabilities that they have.
Yeah, and it's just like out of that in the early 80s, kind of, it's also, when you look at a lot of the street theater festivals that are out today, started around the end of the 80s, right? There's not a lot going, I mean, Edinburgh, Adelaide, there's a few big fringe festivals.
But all the big expos and stuff were that era, weren't they?
88, the expo in Brisbane was crucial for what happened out there. You know, that it was just around that time that suddenly, that's what I was saying before about the professionalizing of the art. That suddenly there were all these great acts on the street. It was just a happening scene, and cities started organizing festivals, and they started coming together. You know, and then it became the art form that it grew to be today. And that's what I meant as far as I was lucky that when I showed up in Amsterdam, I could juggle better than the kids here. And as that whole thing, you know, it took, when you're asking about a transformation point of life, I learned how to juggle. I was a juggler. I always thought it was about my juggling, right? But I don't know. I never studied theater until one year I broke my hand and had to perform the whole summer with a broken hand as a juggler. And my finale became 2 torches in one hand, and everybody bought it. And I realized it's not what you do, it's how you do it. And that's when I realized I became a performer. All right, I never set out, back to your original question, in my youth it was though performing. Coming to Amsterdam, juggling was a way to travel, just to get around. I became good at it. I met people. Suddenly, the whole street theater scene in Europe took off, and that's what I meant about the momentum wheel that my life took off. That I became an international traveling street performer. You know.
So you said this thing a moment ago, which really it sparked my interest. You turned around and said that the moment you realised you could perform was when you went out and did 2 clubs and juggled them in your one hand, and they bought that it was difficult, that it was a challenging thing to do, which for a layperson it might seem, but if you're a juggler, you pick it up quite quickly. Why did you believe that that was the moment you became, you know, a performer, a theatrical performer more than before?
Well, like I said, because until I broke my hand, I was always considered myself a juggler. They were looking at the tricks. I didn't realize they were looking at the person behind the tricks. I was hiding behind my juggling. And having broke my hand that summer, in the process leading up to that moment, made me realize, no, it's not the tricks they're looking at. They're looking at me, the performer. I'm the one entertaining them.
How much juggling was in your show before? Was it like chat, 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 juggle, juggle, juggle? It's very short, 15 minutes, high skill. Is that the kind of show you were doing before?
Yeah, we'll see. All right. Another transgression. My show, I would say, it was definitely, you know, juggling routines and the gift of gab, the interaction with the audience, all that. So just playing the audience, being the street, being crazy, being who I am, being hyper-energetic, you know?
Yeah, the play.
Again, see, one of the things is back in the very first year or two, some Americans came through, a guy called Dale Steele and Scott Hatton, very old duo, and they were riding 6-foot unicycles. Really well, really funny. And they ended up hanging out and teaching us all how to ride the 6-foot unicycle.
Oh, that wasn't pervasive at that point in the European scene that you saw.
For people who know live to play, the first year there would have been 4 or 5 shows going simultaneously, whereas now there's like one big show. We were just little people doing small crowds, you know. It was very much in the beginning. The high unicycle was not a thing in Europe. Of course, it's been in the circus forever. I'm not saying it was reinvented.
So what year were we around now? Is this 89? Is this, or it's 88?
End of 70s, early 80s, Django did the Festival of Fools. More clownery, right? But after the 60s, that sort of thing. Early 80s is when I came to Amsterdam, right? And there were mainly jugglers, acrobats, musicians out on the streets. So when Dale and Scott showed up with a 6-foot unicycle, it was a big thing.
What year did you show up?
We're probably talking 84, 85, something like
Well,
that.
the scene's kind of going by this point. That's when the scene's kicking.
Well, because what then happened is these kids in Amsterdam who I met, you know, they're now all very famous performers in the day, living in a squat, one of them got a welder and realized we could find bikes on the streets and re-weld them up and make a 6-foot unicycle out of them. And we had free time, you know? And so that's when what was called the squat cycle was invented. Was the unicycle, all these home-built unicycles. And
together.
At the same time, these Americans came over and they had like a camper van and were traveling around Europe. And we all saw that, like, oh, that's the deal. You get a van, you put a kitchen and a bed in the back, you can go travel Europe, right? And so we all started buying vans, and that's when the squat cycle was happening. There were a few influential juggling conventions. We're talking 84, 85, 86. That kind of suddenly spread out the high unicycle act, right? And I happened to be in Amsterdam when that started. And then a very big twist of fate is Jean-Michel from the Flying Dutchman, the other half, who is doing the normal to the 6-foot to the 9-foot and eventually the 12-foot unicycle. That's his big trick.
It's a big.
What?
It's a big trick.
It's a big trick, yeah. And we were hanging out one night drinking whiskey late in the Fondle Park, and he said, "Why don't you do that trick?" And I said, "Michelle, I can't do that trick. That's your signature trick, you know." It's like, goes,
why?
I don't
Just for the sake of it, why can't you do that? What's the unwritten rule that you don't do that?
Oh, because look, Michiel, I taught how to juggle. He met Michelle 87 in Saint-France, or at least that's when I met them together. He might have met him in Halifax before that. Anyway, there was this dynamic of us all hanging out in Amsterdam together. He's working with Michiel, who became a superior juggler by then. Michelle's a great clown comedian. That's his signature trick. We're friends living in a small town. You don't steal tricks off each other. You just don't do that, you know, right? And so he's like, "No, I don't want to be the only one doing it. I'll give it to you. I'll teach you to do that trick, mate. You should learn how to do that trick." And so he taught me to jump from the 6 to the 9-foot unicycle the next day when we were sober.
And was it easy enough to learn? Was it something you managed to acclimate yourself to quite quickly?
Yeah, it's not that difficult to trick. Sorry, Jean-Michel. You know, it's like
it's not difficult.
Walking on the side wire. Once you know how to do the trick, it's practicing and learning the trick.
But it is high jeopardy. Minute risk, but high jeopardy. when you go into those kind of heights. If you fall, you're probably going to hurt yourself.
Yeah, but well, we're not going to go there. That's how I broke my hand. But no, there's something, the beauty about a really tall unicycle. That's why I like Jean-Michel. The higher the unicycle gets, the more stable it is.
Yes,
You know,
it's slower, isn't it?
try balancing a broom on your finger and try balancing a teaspoon. A broom's a hell of a lot easier to balance. And it's the same with high unicycle. And that's why I love Michel, is he can really play those limits well, you know? But again, that was just pure fate. And again, as my career went in, once I learned how to do the 6 to the 9 foot unicycle, obviously my show became a lot more attractive internationally, and hanging out with Michel, and that's when all the festivals started. And that, you know, that gave me a good 5-10 year run.
What was the scene like around you when the festival started? How were people feeling about it? What was the hubbub, so to speak, on the street about this kind of slowly blossoming international circuit?
Loving it. It was still in the young, innocent days. You know, these festivals, because one of the big twists of fate in my life, I came to Amsterdam, working in photography, juggling on the weekends, met some people, started teaching juggling in Rotterdam. Like just at a local clubhouse. One of the kids said, oh, some beer festival is sponsoring a street theater festival in a couple of weeks. I signed up. It was all bloody locals who fuck all. Sorry. And by that time, I had already been touring like a year or two the streets of Europe. I actually had a proper show. I didn't have the 9 foot unicycle by far yet, but I had the 6 foot unicycle. And I had, you know, 2-3 years of street under
So
my
you're
belt.
doing a kind of, because the thing is, I look at it through a different lens, I guess, talking to people about back then. Because when I hear you say, you know, I had a show, I'm thinking it's 40 minutes, it's got a crowd build, it's got a middle, it's got a hat line, it's got a finale. Is that what you'd, from looking around and slowly discovering what worked, is that what you'd formed?
Yeah, well, sure, because I started with, like I said, the Fire Online play, right? Then I got a Fire Devil Stick. Then I got a bus and started traveling, and I used to do the show with every bloody prop I could get my hands on. Balls, rings, Diablo club, Devil Stick, leading up to the finale. It was all just the gift of gab taught and building, and yeah, learning how to get a crowd, how to start it all out.
So, because you had all those tricks, did you allow yourself to mix it up, and were you improv-y with your juggling and then judging when to hit for the finale, or did you have quite a scripted piece of work? Were you hitting what you wanted?
You had a regularity, you know, you had a running order, whatever you want to call it. But again, at that point, I was just out doing. I wasn't thinking myself before. I came to Europe to juggle on a street corner, and I was just juggling on a street corner, basically. Sure, it was my gift of gab. I'd gotten rid of the fucking white face. That's the other thing Gino said to me the first time he saw me on the street before we did that show at night. He said, why you got a white face? I said, I don't know. You know, I'm juggling on a street corner in Europe. I got a white face. He goes, Nate, mimes use white faces. Jugglers don't. And I went home and washed off the white face that day, and I never put another one on since. You know? And it's like,
there's a thing about the street as well. A lot of people go onto the street and put on kind of very thick clown makeup to begin with. And I think part of the joy of the street is you'll discover when they first see you what you're doing. It unfolds.
Yeah.
Exactly. I was just interested asking about the show structure, because that's the beginning of what became quite standardized in the end. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, look, back in the day, it was a half-hour show, and you had a crowd build, you had a couple of tricks with the body of show, and you had a big finale where you got up high just to get back to rows 8 to 15. You know, and that became the dynamics of build a crowd, give them a body, get up high so more people can see you, and give a finale. You know, I don't know if you've Dirty Fred, who was a legend in his day and still is. Again, he just got up and he made himself a little stage. You know, Barbarino Gravitini with the wheelbarrow up on a little stage. You know, the whole thing was get a crowd, give them a bit of a show, and then the icing on the cake, get it up higher. That's when you get rows 8 to 15. Because when you're living on the streets, you know, that's what you need to get the coin. You know, to get the height, to get the visibility, to get more people. And then they see the finale, which is the last 5 to 10 minutes. Think, wow, that was fucking brilliant. And by that point, the brainwash, and they walk over, they drop coin in your hat like everybody else.
And so,
yeah,
are you guys? Are you guys at that point kind of sharing this information, and are you slowly refining it between each other as friends traveling around?
It was a whole communal group of friends. The thing is, it was also connected with the juggling network, because I met these high school kids in Amsterdam who, you know, and then that first year there was the European Juggling Festival in Frankfurt, and so we all made our way out there, 400 jugglers together. That's where we met Cotton for the first time. Everybody was high, like 400 jugglers for a weekend. And that's when the juggling festival, there was much more collegiality. There was a good scene.
Say that again. What was it?
What?
It was much more
collegiate, friendly. We were all helping and learning and growing and developing together. There wasn't, of course there were egos always, there were performers, but at the end of the day, there was just a whole movement of everybody growing up from street performing. Wow, look at where this is taking us. Michiel, fresh out of high school, got his first gig in Japan. All those other high school kids were like, what are we going to do with our life? Suddenly in the mid to end 80s, the whole thing just mushroomed out, and we all grew in it together. There wasn't, so we were all helping, supporting them. Dale came here, he taught us all how to do the unicycle. It was pretty
were people precious? Was the people in that community that, say, for example, someone develops a new sequence of moves which looks, shit hot, and they start performing it, but they won't teach it to people, and they don't do it in the gym workshop.
The only place there was that sort of like energy would have been back in the day we were all doing the streets. And if you found a golden pitch or you knew a festival that nobody else knew about, you kept your mouth shut. And there was sometimes, going off to the secret pitch, and sometimes we would never, the content of the show was always supportive and helpful. It was never animosity. It was never, begrudging of anything, at least amongst my circle of friends. The only place there was secrecy is if you discovered a really good street pitch, you kept it quiet. Because
why would you keep it quiet?
Because you didn't want everybody else showing up there. You wanted it for yourself.
Why?
What?
Why? I'm asking you obvious questions, just I think it's interesting for people who wouldn't know this.
Well, because if you found, there's certain places I know in Europe where it's just a beautiful set of steps. It's a natural amphitheater, right against the river. And not a lot of people knew that those steps were there, and it was a tourist town. And so therefore, it's like I went there and I met a few other people who were like, mum's the word. And we just hung out, and that pitch was for us. And we didn't want the hordes of people coming in because there were so many people traveling through Europe in buses back in the day.
And there was the word would get out that somewhere good, and there was a risk that you get swamped by people and then ruin it. They make it.
Some people enjoy doing one country, some people enjoy doing another country. But when you're on
these secret pitches, with these secret pitches, the reason why there's a couple of keeping it quiet, and I know this, I've worked, a lot of my life as a street performer, I know it as well. That sometimes people can come in and they can spoil the vibe on the pitch. They can be really noisy, and it makes everyone else become louder. Were these your concerns? Don't invite lots of people; they'll fuck it up. Or is it just I wanted more shows?
Put it this way: I used to say back in the day, because I've never been to the Edinburgh Festival, right? And in August, when everybody was going up there, I said, why should I travel 1,000 miles in that direction and hang out with 1,000 other performers when I can go 1,000 miles in that direction? And I know a really nice lake in Switzerland where I can camp outside by the lake, swim all day, juggle in the afternoon in the park, have a nice dinner, go into town. I'm the only act in town at 8 o'clock. I can do 2 shows, earn nice coins, go home, have a jump in the lake, and sleep in my bus. It's like, why should I go to Edinburgh where there's 1,000 people? So while everybody else is going to Edinburgh, it's like, no, I'd rather be in a pitch where I'm the only performer there.
Well, I suppose you've got the social thing in the Dam as well. In Amsterdam, you have kind of people coming through, moving through. You've got that itch scratched. For me, Edinburgh very much was a social thing rather than an economic one,
I would doubt it. But it was, I was never drawn there. I've never made it there. So I've been to Scotland a couple of times, but never doing the Edinburgh Festival. So.
Well, there's always time in the future. People are debating whether or not they're going to go and do it for this one. Oh, by the way, Gazzo tells you to cut your hair.
I've been wondering whether or not to do that. Yeah, right.
Not my view. Looks fine to me, but Gazzo insisted I pass on that message.
Cheers, guys.
So you're traveling around. You're working up to the 9-foot unicycle.
But so what I was going to say, the next kind of crucial thing that happened in my life, right, is we have these juggling festivals. We're touring in buses. We're living a good life, young kids, right? And then these people in Rotterdam have the street theater festival I mentioned before, the Oranje Bovenstraat Theater Festival, which is not existing anymore, but was really crucial back in the day. It belonged in the fucking archive. Anyway, I went down there the first year, and I won it like by a mile, because I was the only one who had a show.
Well, it was a competition.
Yeah, it was a competition. There was a golden street cobble, and I've actually got a golden plated street cobble, and I'm the only one who got it, because the next year they made a replica trophy, and they gave it around. But anyway, I won that, and it was just at the time that a lot of groups like Peter Pose, Skate Naked, the Flying Dutchman, who were all my circle of friends, were like, what the? If we can win this, we can win this easy. We can blow him out of the water. And that was just the same summer that organizing these juggling festivals, I ended up organizing the European Juggling Festival in Maastricht. which attracts.
How do you end up organising that? Because you know you don't just walk into a bar and someone says, "You sir, do you juggle? Organise this."
Yeah, well, the European Juggling Festival, I was saying, we went there in '84. There were 400 people in Germany, had the time of our lives, and we started going there every year because it became this whole circle of friends. Jugglers are really collegial. They help each other. It's not like magicians who hide tricks. They're willing to share a trick because if you put in the hours, you deserve to have the trick. You know, right? It's like we're not hiding anything from you there. So anyway,
You've got to learn to do it first.
brought us on this bizarre month-and-a-half long busking adventure down to Gibraltar. There was an epic thing that's documented other places. Ended up in this song, which is actually the picture right behind me here, Juggling Festival in '87, where we had the time in our lives. And then the next year, it's like every year the jugglers decided where it would be organized. And I had found this location in Maastricht that I thought was kind of cool place to bring, you know, a couple thousand of your best friends. But I didn't have a team who could organize it. And we're at the Juggling Festival down in Bradford over in England. And nobody had an idea where we go next year. And there's, I don't know, 1,000, 1,500 jugglers. Well, where are we going next year? And I said, well, I know a town, Maastricht. It's got a camping, it's got a sport hall, you know. But I don't have a team around me. And suddenly just people popped up, right?
And was this just in a cooperative kind of on the spot of the moment kind of thing? It wasn't, you didn't apply through a kind of a community letter or a community magazine?
I went to Bradford. I had the idea of Maastricht in my back pocket. I'd been down there and checked out the location. Didn't really want to organize a festival. So I just kept my mouth shut, hoping somebody else had a proposal. You know, and after I waited and nobody had any other proposal, well, I said, all right, guys, if nobody else has a proposal, I know a place, but I don't have a team. And a few other people, Peter Post amongst them, Mr. Jones, everyone knows him, put up his hand, and together with people in Rotterdam, Dave Marchand, Spotlight, whatever, we organized. But what happened then in that year is we had the European Juggling Festival in Maastricht, where 2,000 jugglers came. They became very legendary for a few things we pulled off there. And the week later was the Oranje Boom Straattheater Festival that I had won the year before. And so Skate Naked, The Flying Dutchman, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, all these acts that were like the top.
Everybody's in town.
What?
Everybody's in town.
Everybody was in town anyway. Everybody went there. And so suddenly all the best acts in Europe with the Oranje Boom Straattheater Festival in Rotterdam, which coincidentally, because I won it the year before, is like people like, oh, well, let's go there. And the Juggling Festival being there, right? And so after that year, the guy who had booked me stepped down and said, do you want to take over the program in the Oranje Boom Straattheater Festival? So suddenly, everybody knew about the festival because all the top acts had been there the year before. Everybody wanted to perform there. And suddenly I was, programming the festival was kind of the place to be back in the day. We're talking, mid-'80s, late 80s, before a lot of, Shalom might have just been started by then, but most of the big street theater festivals hadn't even been born yet. So this is one of the first ones. And so what happened coincidentally is, and I was asked to organize Oranje Boom, or program the Oranje Boom Festival, and like the Juggling Festival has always been really laissez-faire. People organize it, jugglers, they pass the money on from one year to the next year. It was no organization. These people who tried to put an organization didn't happen, and it landed in my heart with the Maastricht. And suddenly I said, well, let's just like make an actual association so we can put this money in the bank and help the next year. And so that's when I founded the EJA. Huh? I've lost your mic.
Yeah, just people are coming past my boat playing loud music, so I'm muting myself. Just to stabilize it, to give it this kind of center point that everything can work off.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and was it easy to do? Was it an easy thing to set up, or was it a long, quite arduous process?
It came across. Oranje Boom asked me to program the festival. And those are my circle of friends anyway. So it was easy. I was out traveling, meeting all these performers. A friend of mine, Oppie, who used to live in the flat where we're filming this now, he became like my secretary, that I would be out finding the gigs, and he would go to the meetings and take care of the admin. We made it a duo job. And so that started, and the EJA started basically the idea of the convention is for jugglers, by jugglers, nonprofit, to make sure that every year it happens in a nonprofit, and if there's any profit, that it can pass on to future generations. And people can take the risk to organize it because it's now a bloody mega thing, the European Juggling Festival. A couple of 2,000 to 5,000 people for a week. It's a huge event.
Yeah, huge.
So yeah, somehow, look, I was hyper energetic back in the day, setting up the EJA, organizing that festival, and traveling and performing. That's That's what my life was back in the day. Yeah.
Well, you were a kid having fun, but at the same time, you were quite. It sounds like in some way a bit fastidious. You put things together. You organize stuff.
I'm a networker. I'm a networker. It's like I could meet. I knew lots of people. I could see things happening, and yeah, I just somehow, sounds weird to say, I've influenced a lot of other people's lives without ever even knowing that I've influenced their lives. Because a lot of times I'm just doing things. You know, and these things came along. There wasn't a premeditated plan behind any of it. Things just came my way, and I reacted, and I did it. You know.
So, what was it like when you took over? Because to pull it back a little bit, because we had quite a lot of things happen to you in the last 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So, what was it like when you first took over the Rotterdam Festival for the first year? You had all the people from all over the world wanting to work this festival because they're aware of it. Did you then go through and kind of curate what was going on there? How did it work when you took it over?
Well, that's what it was, It's a process that a lot of, standard things you do today. In as much as I had my circle of friends, but there was just open registration. And then I would save it up to a certain day, and then you have whatever, 100, 150 promo packets. See, back in the day, what people don't realize today, right, is back in the day when we're talking, if you wanted to fly for a festival, your promo packet was like a VHS cassette. So first you have to make a VHS, then you have to copy it 50 times, together with printed material that you put in your mail and cost you like, I don't know, €5 to actually send international to a festival. So it's not like today where you can just group email 1,000 festival organizers at the same time. It was a really personal thing.
When I interviewed him, he said that he used to ask for the tapes back and people returned them.
What were you saying?
When I interviewed Mikhail Hessling, he talked about when he sent the tapes out, he'd ask for them to be sent back because they're expensive, and people would send them back. I mean, that was incredible to me that people would make the effort back then to look at your tape, but then also mail it back to you.
Yeah, the mailing it back to me, that I never went for. But what was kind of interesting is, again, I went out on the street corners. From there, the first person asked me to come, like, hey, we're having a party. And I started actually getting hired. I never went looking for gigs. They just kind of found me because I was doing street shows, right? But then there's points like, hey, suddenly when there's festivals happening, there's gigs to be had, like when this whole market was emerging and you're sending out these packages we're talking about, your success rate would be like 50 to 75%. Because you'd already have called the organizer on the phone, made the contact, explained what you do, heard the festival's like, okay, you want to see what my show looks like, I'll send you this package. Okay,
what was the competition like at that time?
So
you're getting this hit rate, but is that because your materials were particularly effective, or is that because there was less competition, there was more openness to people to contact?
Competition, but it was forms of communication that you would call someplace, get in touch with the person, have a chat first, and then send your thing on. You already have that connection. You knew what they were looking for. You knew what you could do. What I mean more is when social media came up and suddenly everybody could make themselves look professional and have 1,000 likes and 5,000, 10,000 friends. And I think with friends of mine that have been organizing festivals a while, and I'm like, man, I get 50 emails a fucking week. I can't look at all of them.
So how did you cope with that?
Our generation saying we can't get through because you got to send an email and you're one of 100,000 there. So we can't actually get in touch and talk with the booker and say, well, what are you actually looking to do? So
you don't just throw, metaphorically throw darts at a dartboard to try and pick out of this huge bulk of 1,000, but essentially CVs that have been sent to you.
Yeah. No, look, I want to say back in the day of Orange Bone, I probably got, 80 to 100, maybe 120 applications for 30 spots.
And did you find it difficult to figure out who was going where? Because and who you get and who you don't, because that's surely part of the skill of promoting an organizing event.
Yeah, sure, but I think anybody who's programmed the festival goes through the same thing. End of the day, you got to make choices. Nobody's ever always happy. At the same time, you've taken risks on people, and that's what I said. They've come back years later and said that weekend changed my life. And I didn't know. It's like, well, all right, you applied. Well, I'll give it a shot. It didn't cost me any effort, but it changed their lives. That's what I mean about I've influenced other people's lives more than I realized just by going and doing it. Yeah.
Well, by being a facilitator, and that's the things we've heard so far, helping with the festival and taking over the festival, you're facilitating people to go and present culture there. The EJC and the EJA, sending both of them, European Juggling Convention and the European Juggling Association, is facilitating the juggling community to grow. By facilitating, like ripples, you have a big effect on the juggling world, if not everybody else in some small way. So why did you keep doing Rotterdam? Did you stop?
What happened? Two things happened there. First of all, I've done Rotterdam a number of years, but one of the first things that happened, that was Saturday and Sunday a competition. So there was like a jury, and Saturday and Sunday were shows. And I wanted to have the idea on Friday night, because the artists were showing up the night before anyway. We had a really good hotel with a swimming pool on top floor that had some good times. I said, let's do like the Friday evening super show, where each actress gets 5 or 10 minutes to introduce themselves to the audience, right? And we had 2 stages kind of back to back with a wall here, and then 2 risers. And as organizer of the festival programming, and I was already a performer anyway, I just went back and forth from stage to stage and introduced who this was. And each person did a little 10-minute pre-show. And there was a guy in the audience there from Spain, Carlos, who saw the idea that in the next year he was doing the Tarrega Festival. And he said, Lee, I want to showcase my agency. I really like the way you did that MC work there. Let's do it down in Spain. Can you MC the shows down there? And I'll present my act and we'll have like an ongoing show, like what you did. I don't speak Spanish, Carlos. Come on, my Spanish. No, it's okay, just come. And that led to what became known as El Pati Free, from an agency, Free Art. It had good days and it had less days that we weren't going to hear. Then for the next 10 years, totally took my life and became an MC and a performer. And so there I was programming the festival in Rotterdam and presenting a show down in Spain. That suddenly that whole networking thing came up. But the reason I left Rotterdam is that festival was kind of growing. And it's just when showcase festivals were beginning. Okay, so it was before the
What are showcase festivals?
Showcase festivals, yeah, sorry, motorcycles are coming by my place now. Chalon existed, and Avignon existed, and Edinburgh, and that was about it, right?
And would you describe them as showcase festivals?
So that's where you went for promoters to see you. That's where all the artists
understand.
see. That's where bookers go knowing there to be good artists there, right?
Yeah.
And for street theater, there really wasn't one yet. I think there might have been one, but it wasn't, you know? It was before IPA, the festival, before all the showcase festivals, before the one up in Germany, and I wanted to make Rotterdam into a showcase festival. I was like, guys, you don't realize all the best acts in Europe are coming here, and all these programmers are coming because they know that I'm booking all the best acts in Europe, that it actually is getting this dynamic, and I wanted to take the festival that direction.
And how would you do that? How would you change what you're doing now to be what you were aiming for it to be?
Well, no, what happened is that festival, that was like on a diving board. It had the sprung and it was just taking off. But the board of directors who came from the beer brewery sponsoring it and the publicity agency, they were like every year at the meeting, Matt, same thing as last year. I was like, no, but if we expand this, we can do this, we can get, how to make it grow and develop. And they were really like, no, same thing as last year. And so that's when I decided to leave it, and then I passed it on to someone else. So if you're asking what was the demise, I want to say after that, within some years, the festival still existed and got along, it grew, it changed. But to me, from nothing, it went to something really big, and it was only maybe a period of 3 to 5 years, and then it never really
lost its momentum.
Yeah. But at the same time, by programming that festival, I got to meet a lot of people, and because street performing to me was April till September. So in the winter, you need something to do to keep busy. Somehow organizing festivals, all this, that side of thing I was able to do,
And did you leave Rotterdam with the hope of going to another festival and kind of exercising your ambitions you had in Rotterdam?
No, not a little bit, because after that, this festival in Kunsten op Straat in Enschede asked me with the whole idea of becoming a showcase festival as well. But that was a good 10, 15 years later. Different time, different place. It never really took off.
What did you do directly after Rotterdam then?
Life continues. I've always had all these different hats on that it's not like you're looking at, it's not like performing. It's like I was performing, I was, organized doing this, and Rotterdam became, well, I'm not enjoying this. This isn't going where I want to go, so I'll resign. So it's more that just came, that disappeared from my life. It's not like I left there to go someplace else.
And so did for a time, did you go back to doing street and you didn't do as much festival organizing? Did you have a hiatus?
I've always been doing street. I've always been doing performing. I want to say around that time, look, I started on the street. People started asking me. Festivals started happening. And I had a couple of seasons where I only booked 2 gigs a month. So you had a couple of weeks to do the street and get there, and like you knew that every second week at least you had some guaranteed clients, and you could do the streets on the way to get there. And then gigs started becoming more. Then I had to like a couple of weeks a year really say, no, I'm not taking any gigs, just street.
And you're living in the van at the moment, boogieing around Europe doing the gigs.
Excuse me?
You're living in the van at this moment, boogieing around Europe in the van, doing the gigs and doing the festivals and doing the street.
Yeah, I've always had an apartment or a base, something in Amsterdam, but yeah, traveling around in a bus. Until eventually just the gigs became every weekend, you know? Then it became, well, there's no time for the street. And I guess when kids came, performing became really more my profession.
And were you happy about that? Were you happy about slowly phasing the street out, even if you're not cognitively doing it, that happening? Was it something you were trying to avoid? Were you throwing into it? Were you excited about it? Were you sick of the street?
I was doing the streets as long as I could. And my form of entertainment has always been street theater. But eventually at the end of the day, once I was getting gigs everywhere, there was no need to go to the streets. And it became, why bother? But at the same time, for my performing side of my life, it was just as enriching. It was the contact with the audience. It was making the contact, entertaining, getting the applause. That's what performing's always been about for me, Yeah. And so therefore I did that on the street to begin with, and then eventually led to the stages and festivals and gigs. But the content was still the same. It was going out and connecting with people and having fun with people. And that's always been what I've enjoyed doing about it. It doesn't matter what context. Yeah.
And so when you're doing the gigs every single weekend, it sounds like you're as excited about it as you were when you began. When you were doing the street and you were discovering this new thing as a kind of excited young person.
Yeah, do you transition early mid 80s traveling around in a bus? End of the 80s is when just, from end of the 80s, first half of the 90s, I was like a ping pong ball. That's when just the world was a stage going everywhere. And mid 90s is when my kids came along. And of course that changes things as well. That's when it became more, no, I'll go up and do the gigs when I got a gig, but otherwise I'd rather be home to a certain extent,
Yeah.
But my philosophy has been, I don't care where the airplane's going. If somebody else is paying for the seat I'm sitting on. And so even there were a lot of gigs that were like social circus or just, charity gigs, where you didn't do it for the money. You basically went there, well, look, if you'll pay for my plane to bring me there, I'll go there and do whatever you want me to do, shows, workshop, entertain the kids, whatever, just to go see the world. For me, it's always been about the traveling. Right? I'm a traveler that became an entertainer, as opposed to an entertainer that became an international entertainer. You understand what I mean?
Where's the most interesting place you've done a show in then? It sounds like you've probably done shows in quite a few locations.
The most interesting place? Oh God, there's lots of really memorable ones. That's too difficult to answer.
Well, a noteworthy one.
Coming home in Croatia, to being in Thailand just after the tsunami and going to the refugee camps and being with them.
What was that like? What was it like to be somewhere where people had everything stripped of them, and you're going there, going like funny juggling guy? What?
We weren't as much funny juggling. It was nice, to just go there and see the situation and have contact with local people and get to know what it's like from their perspective. And in exchange for that, what would you have to give is we could show up and actually entertain and distract and have some fun with them.
Are they able to enjoy it? Because it must be so much trauma. I mean, it must be an interesting experience to entertain. I've regrettably, much so now, never taken these opportunities because I've always worried that I would not be sufficient or capable to entertain people in such hardship.
Yeah. Again, I do this to travel, so if the opportunity comes up, I just go there and I'll see what.
But you're not going there to do a shit show, are you? You're going there to do a show that's something that's good for them. And you didn't. I'm assuming you didn't do a show there where they all sat stony faced, and kind of didn't respond to you. I'm assuming that it was fun for them.
No, look, it was definitely fun. It was a lot of ad hoc improv. It was also the group of people you're doing it with. It was mainly through friends who will call me up, hey, I've got a project, come do something. You go hang out with those people and perform with those people. It was pretty simple and basic with performing, but it was just fun to be on an adventure with them.
What were they like as an audience?
Kids are kids wherever you go. A lot of times we dealt with kids. You'd speak with the parents on the sidelines and they'd be dealing with the reality of the day, but the kids were kids and they could just be entertained. And then it's just the cultural differences. When you go to Asian places like that, the kids react to different sorts of stuff.
Yeah, how so?
Yeah. But no,
what kind of stuff do the kids react to in Asia differently to Europe, from your experience?
well, you don't have the language. My show has always been based on language. That was always a challenge for me. That's just the slapstick clown, the basic stuff that works everywhere, you know? That's when you compare it to Europe now, where this intellectual circus audience, you know, in the street theater world where it's come to now, where you're developing intellectual stimulating shows to express where you're going. When you're going in Asia to refugee camp, you just go there to have a laugh. You know, it's not what you do, it's how you do it. You just go there to distract the kids and have some fun, you know? Let them laugh at you for a change.
It sounds like an incredibly valuable thing to do. It really does.
Well, it took me to all sorts of corners of the world. You know, but there were lots of places, I was say, with stages you've been to. The thing is, at the end of the day, I'm really grateful for all the corners of the world that I've got to see because of being a performer and all the situations it brought me into, you know? And that was just the luck of it, yeah.
Sorry, 1 second. Just turn my bloody thing up. First interview I've done for a while, so I've left my phone off mute. Unprofessional. So, so what did you do? We'll drag you back to. I'm trying to get a bit of a chronology, and I'm kind of grasping to try and organize the sequence of events. And we've jumped to mid-90s, and we're kind of jumping around a little bit. So I'm just trying to get an idea of the sequence a bit better. You do Rotterdam. You leave Rotterdam. You work with the EJC, set up the EJA during this time. And then after that, you go out and you're busking. Then you become more booked. You're doing a lot of booked work. What's happening in this chronology next? Do you take up another festival? Is there some other big part that develops you onto the later part of your story?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess when I think back, what happened between the early 80s and I guess the mid-90s to 2000 was just, I don't know what you call it, like the tornado. Events just kind of happened, and I just went with them. There wasn't really a plan, but, you know, he's saying when I've left Rotterdam, now I stopped organizing the Oranje Festival that was in Rotterdam. I've always been based out of Amsterdam. It's not like I was living in Rotterdam. That's only 45 minutes away.
You mentioned you did another festival after Rotterdam.
Well, because of organizing Rotterdam, the Oranje Festival, we'll call it that for Rotterdam. Yeah. Eventually I got in touch with Bremen, Lestrade back in the day. I was advising them. With the juggling festival, the whole idea of the EJA was each year there was a group of jugglers who didn't know what they were doing, and they had to organize a festival so we could come with the experience of the past years. So that's why I became, for the next 10 years, every time there was a European Juggling Convention, I was advising the people of that. So yeah, there became a time where the networking amongst professional organizers also became a part of my life. But that's kind of end of the 90s into the 2000s then, you know? And again, it just kind of happened that, I guess back in the beginning, since Oranje started at the end of the 80s, I was a performer who organizationally had my shit enough together that I knew how to deal with the organizations, right? Companies and the structure of organizing a festival. And there was a dichotomy of, well, should I just stop performing and become a full-time agent or become a full-time festival organizer? I mean, if I had taken the EJ and made it commercial instead of nonprofit, I could be living off that today. But
are you glad that you did that? Are you glad you didn't commercialize it as someone else might have?
Look, money has never been the motivation in my life. I've always just done what I wanted to do, you know, and somehow money is taking care of itself. So with the EJA and all this other stuff, you know, organizing festivals, well, it was kind of, to me, that was my winter work, because the Street Theater Festival was April till September. And so in the winter, I had time free, and I knew how to deal with the paperwork. So I kind of fell into this whole organizer's mafia, or whatever you want to call it.
And was the mafia, interesting term for that, it links in a little bit with what I was about to ask you. Was there there's a lot of cross communication between all the festivals? Does everyone at this point know each other and they're all part of the same kind of functionary society?
I don't want to say everybody in all, but yes, a lot of people. Just like performers would get together and have a beer at the end of the day and talk about where they've been and what shows they've done and what tricks work and blah, blah, blah. Festival organizers, what did you see? Oh, I'm going to book them. What's he doing? What's he doing?
People get their notepads out.
Yeah, for sure. Names, you know, especially if you're there for a weekend, that Friday night, Saturday was like, oh, go see them on Sunday. You know, Sunday, suddenly half the audience was bookers. And you can just look around the audience and see them. You know, they were the ones that scored that weekend. Yeah.
And was the, there's a lot of cross communication between all the festivals? Does everyone at this point know each other and they're all part of the same kind of functionary society?
I don't want to say everybody in all, but yes, a lot of people.
Yeah. And for you now, this becomes quite a stable thing of you having your finger in lots of pies, because you've been there at the beginning and you've helped establish things that are integral to the scene in Europe. People kind of go to you for advice and for help, and it's very easy for you to be busy, to be involved in stuff in the off-season periods because people are coming to you. Yeah.
Yeah. These days, you mean, or back then?
Back then.
Oh no, back then we were just a whole circle of friends. So we were just all in touch with each other. It wasn't, in the winter, that was my reason I could give friends of mine a call. Hey, I've heard about a gig here. People will call me up. Well, I guess what happened beginning back with Orangebone is people in the back office realized all my circle of friends were actually really talented performers. All right? And somehow friends of mine who were performers realized at least sometimes it knows the people who have gigs to be had. And so somehow I just ended up in between the two. And they always give me an excuse to call a friend.
And so what was your highlights of things you were involved in through, let's leave the 80s now. We're hitting an hour. I think we can move into 90s happily. During the 90s, what was some of your high points? What were the particularly interesting festivals that you were involved with?
As a performer, for some reason, I wish I knew it better. My memory is shit. But there was a festival in Leeds at the Juggling Festival. It was in whatever the big famous theater is for Leeds, the big old with the tiered balconies and the whole thing. And I was doing by that point the 6 to 9 unicycle, 6 to 9 foot uni. And the person putting the show together said, "We want you to open the show." And I was like, "Open the show? I'm always the closing act on the high unicycle." He's like, "No, we want to open with a bang. We want you to open the show." And I went out and I just killed it that night. And it was a fresh crowd, raring to go, in a beautiful location, and it was just a magical moment. That's a memorable thing. Another one back on the streets in Lucerne with just street people you've met.
What do you think were the most influential festivals of the 90s happening in Europe?
The most influential festival?
Yeah, the ones that really kind of were pivotal with what was developing.
Look, Orangebone was there for a while. La Strada in Bremen. In France, you always had Aurillac and Charlon. And Tarrega in Spain. And if I went to the UK, I guess back in the day it would have been Edinburgh. They were kind of the big name festivals. Yeah.
And so when you're moving through the 90s, you're doing your club work, the festivals are all going on around Europe.
No, I've never done the club work. I've always done street theater.
But you said you're booked, but you're booked to work in squares.
Look, another lucky thing is this guy Carlos Friart. I went down to Pedega and I just emceed his show. He sold it as El Patifri, an evening feeling variety open air performance. So we would go sometimes from 6 in the afternoon till 2 in the morning nonstop. He'd get half dozen acts, each one doing 2 times a half hour, and I became the constant MC. Right? And the acts could come and go depending on the city, the budget, the time, the availability. But I became the standard MC of El Patifri. And Carlos was able to sell this very well. So, I mean, there were some seasons where I think at the high point I must have did 10 or 12 of these in the summer, which basically meant there's only 12 weekends to a summer. I got in this rhythm, like Thursday was a travel day, Friday, Saturday, Sunday I was somewhere in Spain doing El Patifri. Monday was a travel day, Tuesday and Wednesday were my weekend at home, and Thursday I was back on a plane back to Spain again.
You carry on, but I can hear you. It's just like pissing it down with rain, so I'm just going to close my window. You carry on, I can hear you.
It's so funny here in Amsterdam. So anyway, things that, catalyst in my life was Jean-Michel teaching me the 9-foot unicycle. Then starting El Patifri down in Spain and doing that for 10 years, being the MC and having lots of gigs with that. And, in between was festivals. And then Klein Respect. But I'll wait till you come back. Then we're getting into the 2000s.
Why didn't you become an agent in the end? Why didn't you take the kind of...
Easy. Because as an agent, all you do is you get the shit from both sides and you're powerless to do anything about it.
How so?
You got your client you got to keep happy. You got your artist you got to keep happy. If anything goes wrong, they're both going to come back and complain with you, A. And B, come on, sorry, what's more fun? Sitting behind a desk, dealing with the paperwork and the admin and watching all your friends going off and doing gigs? Or going off and doing the gigs yourself? It's way more fun to go off and do the gigs. Like I said, I was tempted to become an agent or performer, but I just realized performing is, was, has, and always will be the most fun job in the world. You know, and so if I can do that for a living, that's a job that I would like to do more than anything else. Be on stage in front of people and be a performer. You know?
And you still enjoy it to this day? It's not changed. It's been a continuous thing.
Well, I've stopped performing now, unfortunately, or I haven't found the right venue, or I haven't found the right niche, especially with
I
Corona.
thought you were performing in Australia in the break of the lockdown.
No, I wasn't performing there. I was just in Australia.
Okay, fair enough. I just assumed
I
you'd
spend my winters in Australia. I don't spend my winters in Holland. I try to spend my winters in Australia.
Okay.
No, basically, one of the... This is jumping to the end of the story almost.
Well, this is it. I'm kind of in 2 points of thinking, well, let's save the stuff for later on in the story for towards the end of this stuff.
To get along. So mid-90s, kids are born. Mid-90s to mid-2000s, I was doing a lot of El Paso Freeze down in Spain, plus just other street theater festivals around Europe and around the world, raising kids, living half the year in Australia, half the year here. Still traveling.
Why living half the year in Australia?
Half the year, 3 months. Sorry, exaggeration.
Is that the winter? You're wintering in Australia.
First of all, I've got 2 kids, and they're bilingual. My wife is Dutch, and so we wanted them to do at least 1 semester of school in English language every year. Dutch winters are shite, gotta say it.
Yeah.
And it's always been a dream of mine to, you know, buy a block of land and build a house, and those things all came together that when the kids were small. We bought a block of land in Western Australia. We go out every year, January to April. Kids will go to school, and I've been banging boys together trying to build a house down there. You know, and that just became, it was also because when the kids came, my wife said very intelligently, if we both work 50%, we've got 1 full-time income and 1 full-time job. We both have time with the kids. We both have time with our normal career in our lives, right? And so it became April till September was my season, and 4 months got her what most people earn in 6. September till January, she would work, I would take care of the kids. January, April, we could go to Australia and hang out there. Come back in April broke, and then the European street season would start again.
So Australia was not a place to work for you?
No, because where I live is pretty remote. And so I did some gigs back in the beginning. I did some work in Australia. I have worked there. But at the end of the day, I've chosen to not work there, or it hasn't happened. Yeah. No, I go there.
It's not a choice. It's not like there's a particular...
Well, no, like a 6-hour drive to the nearest airport, and that's Perth. And then you got a 5-hour flight to you know, Sydney, Melbourne, anything like that. So, yeah, there is work in WA. If I wanted to work, I'm sure I could. End of the day, we went there to go unplug and get away from everything for 3 months of the year. Just go to a small town, kind of out of touch with everywhere, and disconnect. So, yeah, no, I didn't perform much there.
So what happens to you after the 2000s then? It seems like we've been shunting slowly up to...
I guess the last thing that came into my career that I was really fortunate about is a festival in Germany called the Kleinheitsfest in Große Garten, which a lot of people will know. It's just a magical, one of the most beautiful events in Europe, you know? And
why is it so magical and beautiful? What's about it makes it so?
Okay, it's, excuse me if I'm wrong, art lovers, I want to say it's a Baroque garden. It's a beautifully manicured garden in Germany behind a Schloss, of the castle, more or less, right? And the concept of the evening is there's 30 acts. Each person more or less gets their own stage. 20-minute showtimes, 5-minute block for the audience to change, 20-minute showtime. So it's kind of, at any moment, 8 stages are going out of the 30.
And it's not hatted? This is just you showing...
No, I'm getting to that. It's a ticketed event, and the guy only lets in 3,000 people per evening. So they're all small, intimate crowds, right? But so anyway, from 7 till 10, the people come in, there's all welcome. 7 to 10, there's shows happening, and everybody is in their own little beautiful manicured corner of the garden. You got your own stage, 3 weeks long. You get to know the rhythm, lovely audience, and he ends the night with everybody getting to come by the big fountain with fireworks. And it's a magical, beautiful event. And from an artist perspective, it's 3 weeks, so it's 18 nights in a beautiful event, in a beautiful hotel with beautiful artists. It's just a really nice gig.
And how many shows are you doing a night then? If you're doing 20 minutes, turning it over, and they're kind of cycling. Okay, that's really manageable. That's not too much.
Yeah, and it's regular, 8 to 8:20, 8:25. The people walk. You know, after the first night or two, your show comes or whatever. You know, 8:15, 9:25, 10:15. Go to the fireworks, and you just get used to the rhythm. But it's lovely audiences, a lovely location. It's just a magical event.
And how do you make money there? I know that it's not about money, but it's something you need to do.
Paid gig.
It's paid. So they book you, they pay you, they book you to do the sets.
Yeah,
You're not.
I mean, my show is an interactive street show. Not all the shows there are street theater even. You know, there's very theatrical things. There's all sorts of stuff.
Well, it's one of the lovely things I see when I go and do some European festivals, which I don't do very often for certain reasons that we'll talk about when I'm not interviewing yet. But I love the variety, and you see a huge variety of different kinds of work. I saw a French group, four piece, do a kind of abstract play, you know, and you'd never see that in the UK on the street.
Well, see, what's changed, again, the professionalizing that I mentioned earlier. We started, you had to go on the street, you had to hold an audience at the end and have them. That's how you earned a living, right? But as these festivals came, and another influence, Cirque du Soleil, and the rise of circus schools in Europe. Look, there used to be only 1 or 2 circus schools in Europe. Now there's 40 or 50 of them. And people do a 4-year degree in learning dance, choreography, movement, administration, circus skills, and they want to be casted into a large program where the director says exactly what they need to do. You know, and what amazed me is coming from the street for the first time. Hate to be racist, don't mean it this way, but it tends to be a lot of the French festivals where it was really art on street. It wasn't street theater, it was the theater on the street. That would never survive passing the hat. It's not meant to be, but it's a group show directed. They need an hour or 2 setup time, the sound system at the core. They present a theater piece in the open air environment. Festivals like Ural, very much using the environment to people just as interactive as street theater, but it's set up professional groups. It's not the spontaneous thing of us. What I loved and admired, somebody else I want to mention this thing is Kevin Brookings gave me the best metaphor in the world. That should be archived. I'll tell you that in a second. It's the guy with one person who can come out with a suitcase and anywhere, any place, anytime makes the magic happen. He doesn't need a sound system. He doesn't need a tech running. He doesn't need any special effects. Just the person, the character, the clown, and his bag of toys is all you need to entertain. And to me, that's the epitome of what it was. You know,
Do you think, you said what it was. Do you think that that is less viable a route nowadays?
Yeah, because festivals want a full show. It almost has to have an artistic motivation statement to go with it. It comes back to the old argument of art versus entertainment. I've always been an entertainer. Everything I've been involved with is entertaining.
Why is it a versus? Why is it a dichotomy that's against each other, competing?
Let's put it this way: art can be entertaining, and entertaining can be artful, but it's 2 totally different things to me. Art is somebody who's doing this because they have to express something and what they want to present. Entertainment, to me, I guess when I think about it now, is going more, what does the audience want? How can I give them what they're looking for? I've never thought of it like that. That's just come out.
Yeah, Dave Rave said a very similar thing when we were talking about this same subject. The idea that it's about how the crowd feels, it's not about how you feel. Whereas he believed that the artist, it's about how the person feels. It's what I want to say. It's about me. It's not about you. It's about me.
Tom, you asked me before about what the programmer's thinking. People booking festivals always try and find a balance and a mix of everything. So they can take this with a theatrical piece that might not be popular with the audience at all, but has some sort of impressive thing about the creation behind it. And then they'll take a risk of something not derogatory, on that, something really streety that is basic, banal, but connects with the audience and makes the magic happen and the bloody fireworks. And do you
find things that cross over the boundary? Do you find things that are
all over the place? Of course. There's really artistic groups that are bloody entertaining, and there's entertainers that are bloody artists of what they're doing. There's all sorts of things in the scale there.
And how have you, because you've been involved in booking, looking at the work that is, percolating around Europe for decades. How is it, you've touched on it a little bit, but I want to go into more detail of it. How has the work changed that you see generally, that you see people producing and putting out there?
Okay. First of all, I should clarify that I probably haven't organized an event in a good 10 years. So I'm not up on the current. I mean, I see it, I follow it, and I guess the difference is in I guess festivals started programmers, there's a lot more personal contact, and these days, and there's a lot more, the competition, like I said, if there's 30 circus schools in Europe, which there probably are, each graduating 10 students a year, that's 300 artists a year coming into the market, right? And it's sure the market for theater has definitely grown, there is space, but it's a lot more competitive. And that was my luck back in the early days. When I showed up in Europe, there was nothing. And I could juggle just a little bit better than everyone else. And somehow on the streets I survived. And it's like surfing a wave. And that's, you know, if I showed up in Europe now, being who I was when I was a kid, there's no way I would have made it. You know?
And it seems like you're not, I mean, I've in my thoughts about it, from the perspective I've had, been quite critical about the change in what you see in street festivals. My perceived change, I haven't been around to see it. You get more of polished pieces of work as opposed to, say, like Pepe Mine or Kino or something like that. They probably maybe don't get a shout nowadays.
No, look, it's become all scripted. Yeah, for sure. I don't enjoy that. I mean, I don't enjoy that. Like I'm saying, I really love the spontaneous clown. I mean, if you go back in days with Buster Keaton, but in my career, people like Abner the Eccentric and Kevin Brookings were two of the big influences of just really sympathetic clowns that knew how to connect with people. You know, these days, I think Joe Diffenbacher is also one of the people, and oh, why can't I remember his name? He's going to be really different. The guy's living in New Zealand now. I can picture him on his face, his name. Sorry. Fraser.
Okay, yeah. Fraser Hooper.
And Joe and Kevin and Abner have just that simple sensibility that they connect with an audience with the blink of an eye, and it's just, you know, what they do. Leandre is also one of those down in Spain. The show Leandre and Claire did was, I think, when you're talking about art versus entertainment, right? I'll never forget down in today, Claire and Leandre, for the people who remember them, did the show about a little house that they did with masking tape. It was brilliant, okay, and it was kind of the main show on a Saturday night, and for a half hour, the entire audience just watched transfixed. There was not a single applause moment. There wasn't really I mean, there was laughter, there was shoot, whatever. There wasn't really, you know, like street theater, hey, give it, you know, there was nothing big. But after a half hour, the whole square just stood up in a standing ovation. And it was probably one of the most amazing pieces of street theater I've ever seen. You know?
And that's the whole battle, isn't it? That you got these guys who are hyping the shit out of shows, and I honestly believe that, I think that, at least from what I can see in the UK, modern circle shows, the construction of entertainment as street is in a bit of crisis. All the lines are the same, all the tricks are the same, the structure's the same.
I'll probably shoot myself in the foot because I've never performed Covent Garden either. Right? I've never been part of that scene.
Well, I'm a regular there, so I can definitely fill you in on that.
I'm talking about back in the day. I don't even know what it is today. And the groups that went to Australia, and what in Australia first started, it's changed a lot since then, were the real one-trick money shows. Gab, 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 talk, 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 drag it out, and then the trick that you do, if you've seen the Moscow State Circus or the Chinese State Circus, really isn't very impressive at all. But you build it up, you've got the big finale, the audience has their orgasm, and they put money in your hat, and it works. You know, and that's one genre. And I regret that that genre is dying out, because all over Europe now, especially now because of Corona, you can't even bring people together.
See,
but anyway,
it's not dying out though, because in Covent Garden we started up a few months ago, and people are going and they're trying to push this square-shaped block, in my opinion, through this circle-shaped hole of doing this structured show. And sooner or later it will come back. And my big worry in street performances that
I think what changed it more was 9/11. Because back in the 80s and the 90s, you could just travel around, go in a street corner, do what you wanted. Nobody caused you any harm. Sure, the cops might move you on, but then you went to the next town, you know? And then somehow after 9/11, with the whole security thing, people coming together, and I guess, you know, tourism, EasyJet coming up, cities becoming more populated, and city marketing getting in on the scheme from, hey, if we regulate street theater, we could use it to our advantage. The whole freedom that we had in the 80s and the 90s have been gone since 2000. And it's never coming back. And that's something that I think I miss. It's a shame until somehow it gets reborn. But people of your generation, the streets now, it's more a straitjacket that's confining you in what you do, compared to what we did back in the day, where it was the freedom of just go out, travel in a van, and do whatever you wanted on a street corner and see what happens. Worst that can happen is the people walk away, right? And if the people walk away, well then, fuck it, you try again in a half hour. You know, it's become. You know, I guess you got your half-hour pitch, make it or break it. You know, if you get whatever time of day you get, that's your time to make it or break it. You know, it's much more constraining. So to me, I think the change happened, the combination of 9/11 and security measures, the professionalizing of the street theater world, that suddenly there were festivals around taking all the good talent off the streets, and that people were realizing, hey, why should I bother going on the street where I don't know what I'm going to earn if I can make a show that's festival ready and just go and get booked by a festival with a prepared scripted show and earn a living like that? And all those things have just sucked it all away from the streets. And I mean, Amsterdam in 84, 85 was the mecca of street theater. You go out in Amsterdam now, now there's nothing. But when it comes back, Dan Lives are playing.
Mark Seymour will be back down there when it's opened back up. You know that.
Look, people will be back, but it's not anymore the center of street theater in Europe. It's not anymore a highlight stuff, you know?
But I tell you what I think I've noticed, and I've noticed it's a bit in Covent, a little bit less so in Edinburgh. Edinburgh tends to have a more creative base to it. There seems to be a lack of excitement about the street. It seems to be people are just, it's punch cards. Go in there, do the bit, punch the card. You know, from what I can see about, there's not people really loving it and pushing it and trying to develop it and make something new and interesting.
Look, I don't know, because I haven't been on the street in a long time, but maybe the novelty for the audience is worn off as well.
Well, you know, there's only so many times someone can tell someone to take their parachute off they've landed and the audience will be laughing. It's a shit joke to begin with, but you get away with it because it sounds impromptu.
Well, I thought, and this we're going back 10 years already. For a while, I was teaching in Kodar, the circus school in Rotterdam, and I brought in a video of an old show from the late 80s, early 90s that at the time was like the best. And then all the students were like, oh, those are just all standard lines. Why even bother showing us this? I was like, no, you don't get, these are the guys that came up with those lines. All right? Everybody else has been copying them and doing this. But when they did them, they were new and unique and they were their signature lines, you know? And it's like,
and they meant something to them. They personally integrated with who they were because they wrote them.
And of course it worked. Oldies but goodies on oldies but goodies for no reason. If a good joke works, people are going to take it and travel around the world. And that's what makes creative artists special, the ones who just keep coming up with new material and stay ahead of the game. You know, and those are the ones I admire, the ones that just keep going and keep coming up with new material, because I've seen people doing the same show for 20 years now. And they can earn a good living, and it's a great show. The audience is entertained. There's nothing wrong. But you go to the office and you do your punch card. You know, and then you have the
hardwired brain that there's no option of left or right. It's just,
no, they've got their show and it works. But you know, the arts versus entertainment, to me, the artists then the ones that are every couple of years creating a total new show and a new character and doing something totally different.
So, give you an example. Andy Livingspace, I think, is possibly one of the better street clowns working on the street around. I think his work creative, is interesting. It has something that a lot of shows miss, which is subtext and metaphor for something that's trying to say something.
Yeah.
Him and a load of other, you know, Brian Reed is another example, incredible writer, creates beautiful work. They don't seem to hat as well as these big power shows, and they don't seem to make as much. Is that pervasive? You have a lot more experience of acts than I do. Do you find these creative people don't commercially?
I've seen mediocre shows be commercial successes and shows that I'm blown, and artists that I've just admired my whole career that are just never meant to, you know, they do the big gigs, they do the big shows, but they're just, you know, yeah, you have it both, it cuts both ways, you know.
So, is it just a thing that we see them and we associate with that, or is it kind of like, what I'm thinking is it a either or? Is it that these people, because they're creative, because they work on it, because they've got a work focus, not a business focus?
No. There's all variations in between, you know, and that's why, especially where I put myself, as far as I know creative geniuses have done really well out of it. I know creative geniuses that no matter what they do, somehow they're just always going to be living, you know, hand to mouth. I've seen really generic acts that have earned a fortune, and I've seen really generic acts that are just like never get anywhere.
They're just
that's why I think it was interesting, because all the things that I've gotten in my career were passed on to me. You know, that even though I guess I am creative, the big tricks of my show were all given to me by other people. I didn't come up with it myself. I came up with the show. You know, and that was one of the things, especially all the years touring, that I was living in the same town as Flying Dutchman. And you got Michiel is a good juggler, Jean-Michel is a good unicyclist, they're funny, and they're a duo show. And here I am doing 15 minutes of juggling and then doing the 6 to 9 foot unicycle, the Flying Dutchman in solo version. It's never going to be as good as the Flying Dutchman. You know, we're living in the same town as friends.
I've watched you do comedy, you do crowd play. You have a way of handling and dealing with a crowd that is you, surely.
And look, that's my blessing in life. I'm a people person. It's why Corona has been really tough on me, because everything I do, I mean, people don't know the last 5 years I've been a captain on a little boat in Amsterdam, being a tour guide through the canals of Amsterdam. But I'm still liaison, still performing, it's still a show, you know? And when Corona came, everything I do involves groups of people. I'm a facilitator, a networker, an entertainer amongst groups of people. And then comes Corona, and everything I do, you just throw out the window.
How did you feel at that time?
What?
How did you feel at that time?
Look, I accepted it really quick. Like right away in April when the lockdown hit, I just looked around and I said, right, everything I've done, throw out the window, you know? And so, yeah, it's been an interesting year. I've seen a lot of performers, again, the ones that are all longer in the tooth, have taken up other trades, other professions, reorientated, done other things in life. And it'll be a catalyst in a lot of people's lives, and we'll see where it all lands.
It's amazing the amount of people that have undiscovered or undisclosed skills, crafts, or talents that have emerged over this lockdown. You know, anybody selling anything they've created or made or traded.
People are doing something. I think to me what was interesting is, as far as my career goes, is the Kleinest Fest in Grosse Garten was, like I said, in Hanover, was one of my favorite gigs. I did it in 2002, and somehow I felt in that I did it pretty much every year for the past 20 years, a couple of years out. And to get a lot of people I never knew how or why, but somehow I fell in with the guy Hoddle who organized it. And the past few years, I kind of felt like my career was in its twilight. I hadn't come up with a new show. I wasn't sure what I was doing. And out of nowhere, in a strange evening, Hoddle calls me to ask me to do the Kleinest Fest in Hanover. And it was so nice in 2019 to go back there. And it was funny because I wasn't performing much anymore. But as soon as my foot touched the stage, I was just home. And I had the 3 most beautiful weeks of performing, of lovely crowds the whole time. And those are the last shows of my career. Because that ended my season 2019, and 2020, the season never started. And 2021 is not happening. And I think when street theater comes back, as far as all the festivals and gigs, I really grant it to the next new young generation to take over.
Are you not going to be promoting and like kind of, you know, that there could be a new golden age of maybe not street theater, but of public city festivals and all this kind of thing, as people try and draw people back out of their homes? Are you not aiming to be involved in that?
Not really, no. No.
What?
Yeah, it's you know, street theater, 35 years of my life, the best job in the world. It's taken me to all the corners of the world. I'm nothing but grateful for everything it's done. But it's run its course, you know? As you know, you get older, I don't have the physical energy to do it anymore. And to me, one of the things that's always interesting about performing is your ego. Back in the day when the unicycles first hit the street, getting up higher was a big scenario. Who can have the biggest show? Who can have the biggest hat? Prove your ego, right?
Well, there was kind of a playful camaraderie and competition between everybody.
At the end of the day, it was who's the biggest here. You know, who can get the biggest hat? Who's the best show? Of course, that element's always been there. Right?
Was it mean? Was it fairly? You know, it was all very nice and friendly and playful.
It was all friendly and playful, but of course, anytime you went to a pitch, who got the biggest hat? You know, of course, that still plays today, I think. But what changed for me was really interesting is doing one of these El Pati Frees in Spain, and I had gone out and done my opening show, and I came off you know, and this young woman was like, "Wow, man, you killed out there." I was like, yeah, that's what I do. I go on stage, I kill. That's my job. You know, I came off stage and it didn't give me that same, like, I've got to get the biggest crowd so that I can get the biggest hat so that I can prove I've got the best show everywhere. It's like, well, no, I get paid my fee to fly down here, and I'll fly down here, and I'm going to go on stage, and of course I'm going to kill. That's what they hire me to do. You know what I discovered? What you learn on the street, performing in any situation, dealing with anything that comes across your path, that when you get into the organized festival world, the fact that you're adaptive, flexible, whatever. I'll never forget, one year I went to Glastonbury Festival, and I was given the worst shows possible. Like, really the worst shows possible.
Why were they the worst shows?
What?
Why were they the worst shows possible?
Well, I mean, 11 o'clock on Sunday morning, 1 o'clock at night on Saturday. Places where it's like fucking impossible to get a crowd in Glastonbury. And I went to the woman and was like, why? She looked at me and said, Lee, it's a compliment. There's only a few performers I trust to program at that time. All right? If I put a mediocre act out there, they're going to die the death of horrors. You know, there's such tough pitches. There's only a few people I'll put out there. You know, and that's when I realized I became in my performing career. Is like, no matter where you put me, what's happening, I'll adapt. I'll make magic happen.
And you put that down to surfing the chaos that is doing a show in the street.
Of course. One of the best lessons I got, and I almost want to say it's from Kino, and I'll attribute to him, is Out in Surfer's Paradise. And back in the days when you're just starting, anytime somebody leaves your edge, you get really nervous, like, oh, I'm screwing up. No, I got to build a crowd. You know? He says, listen, if people leave your show, there's 1,000 reasons why they're leaving your show. They might have to pick up the cut. They might have a message. They might have this. Only one of the reasons is because they don't like your show, right? And if they leave the show because they don't like your show, that's actually a really good thing, because that creates room in your front edge from somebody who does enjoy your sense of humor, right?
You smile and laugh and
Actually, like, all right, I'm going to do my thing. If you enjoy it, come hang out and watch. And if you don't enjoy it, move on, no worries. And it just totally relaxed me. And that's what helped, because in Party 3, I had to open the night, build the crowd, set the atmosphere, do the opening act. And then after a half hour, 45 minutes, I passed it on to the first act of the night. It was the MC for the rest of the night.
so you said it used to, you, sorry to interrupt, but I'm just really interested before we move on. You said that what made you a more comfortable performer is the idea of letting people leave and not being too worried about it. But what I'm interested in is the thing that's the precursor to that is, were you getting bitter or stressed, or was it a source of discomfort and unhappiness, both in or out of the show, that people were leaving? Were you taking it personally?
Of course. When I was young and I was beginning, very much so.
And how would you deal with that? Would you try and lock the show in? Would you verbally attack the people that left? What was the way you dealt with it?
No, you're talking back in the days where it's like you go on a street corner and you get 5 or 10 people watching, and you're hoping to build up to 50 or 100 people. And after 15 minutes working, there's still only 5 people looking at you, and the show's going nowhere, you know? Then you go back and you don't feel very happy, you know? But that's just, you wake up the next morning, you try again.
But when you say you don't feel very happy, are you not? And I know how I feel when this happens, and I know the multitude of reasons that I feel the way I feel. But for you, is it because you wanted money, you didn't get it, you needed the cash, or was it personal? Was it a feeling of being loved and liked?
No, it was the whole idea of you go out there to do a show, to have fun. The cash was always nice. That was a bonus extra, you know? It's like there was only one memorable show where the cash made a difference, you know? And the rest of the times it was like there was a pile of coins and, you know, you went out to have fun.
But when people left, do you believe, did you have a feeling that they personally invalidated you? That they...
Of course. And in the beginning, and I think that's what makes an artist the whole time, you're always constantly adapting, changing, moving, what's working, what's not working. And back in the beginning, well, you just try a different thing every day, and what works, you try again the next night. And that was part of the learning process. So
and
yeah, especially when people leave.
You touched on this earlier, that you say the streets change, it's become regulated, and perhaps there's not space for people to go out and experiment anymore.
Yeah. I have no idea how that is, because I guess if it's regulated where there's certain pitches, you got to do an audition to get into that pitch. Well, yeah, how do you get good enough to do the audition?
And what happens if you do something that's different in a show, that works in a show, but doesn't work in a buddy audition, that people can't see it if it's not with people around them, you know?
I'm sure that happens all over, you know?
How do you, as a promoter, try and tackle this as the years have gone on, as the world's changed? How do you try and still find those gems of people who've, you know, there's a guy who plays a traffic code in London.
I haven't promoted anything street theater-wise probably since, like, I don't know, a good 10 years.
But when you were doing it, there's a guy in London who plays a traffic cone, right? I've watched him do it for 10 years now, little heroin addict dude. Yeah. And when he started doing it, it was... over 10 years, he's developed this haunting sound that people stop and listen to now. Yeah. You know, there's really sad, somber, drifting notes that is him with a traffic cone pressed against his mouth, going, blah, 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 blah. You know, I'm not doing it justice. That's something really cool. It's trashy as fuck, but he's developed a craft of a traffic cone. How do you find these people still when it becomes commercialized, when you have circus schools pumping out produced pieces of work?
So that's why I got out of it, because it became more difficult. Back when I was doing all of it, I was traveling the world as a performer as well. So I was being booked at festivals around the world. Then I'd look around, I'd meet someone at a festival who was a good actor. I'd say, hey, I'm programming a festival in Holland. Do you want to come to Holland? That was part of that whole networking facility thing, by being out in the field. And that's also the change I noticed is my kids came, performing became more my job, as much as I enjoyed it, right?
You had to earn a certain amount of money.
Kodak, 10, 15 years later. And I realized that young people who actually had all the time in the world, they could go out and network. They could go see everybody. They would watch each other's shows. They would hang out after the shows. They would discuss what worked, what didn't work, drink beers till late in the night, just like we used to do when we were in our 20s. But when you're 50s, you're not going to hang out all night and do that same sort of thing. And that's when I realized, no, that's the new young generation who's willing to go out and work for $2 just to go out and get the experience and do the shows and then come up with creative, unique ideas. And that's that whole dynamic of being young, creative. And I mean, what I love about the artists, especially young artists, is they do it just to do it. And it's not about a commercial thing. And the commercial thing comes later. And as you get older, the commercial thing takes over from the creative thing, then it becomes your job. So that's
do you think that's detrimental? Do you think it's a detrimental thing to the craft itself to move to that mode?
Look, I think it has to always grow and change. And where it's going to go, where it's going to change next, nobody can see. But growth and always change always comes from the younger generation. Because they're the one coming in and saying, we're going to do it different. We want to do it new. We're not going to accept what everybody else did. And they'll come up with new creative ideas. And yeah, a lot of it will be shite. And how do you find the good ones? Your question 5 minutes ago, by actually being part of the scene and seeing a lot and talking and hearing and making it your life. And from early 80s to mid 90s, it was my life. Right? From mid 90s to 2005, slowly but surely, other things came along. At one point I mentioned earlier the deal I had with the wife. We both worked 50%. And to me, that was performing, right? And she's like, yeah, but you're performing half the year, and you're organizing 2 street theater festivals, and you're the president of the EJA, and you're trying to build a house in Australia 4 months out of the year. How's that add up to 50%? It's like, and that's when I'd have to start giving up the EJA, start giving up the festival organizing, and choosing for myself, I'm mainly going to concentrate on being only a performer. And so probably by 2010, I got out of organizing just because it came too much. What you were asking before, how did you do all those things? You do that when you're young, and at a certain point it becomes too much, you become more selective.
Did you, when you stopped doing it, was there still part of you that kind of missed it, that wanted to be involved in it, but you were...
I'm talking with you tonight. I mean, I love following the street theater world and seeing everything that's going on. Sure, I miss it. But, at the same time, like I said, I'm grateful for everything it brought me in life. And it's time to move on. And just like it's time for the young generation to take the art and move on with it, it's time for me in my life also to move on and do other stuff.
And what do you see yourself doing then?
I don't know. Wait and see what crosses my path.
You're just going to look at which way the wind blows.
Yeah, look, when Corona comes along, you start thinking, I've got all the time in the world. What do I want to do with my time? And I've got some ideas, and I'm planting some seeds, and we'll see what the next chapter in life is. If you look at it, the trimester 0 to 25 years old is one, 25, 55, 60 is a whole wah phase of life. And I've been through that. And now, look, the kids are out of the house. What am I going to do for the next 20 years? It'll probably be something totally different again. And that's what makes life interesting. Is not, like I said, I'm amazed friends of mine that are doing the same show already 25, 30 years. And living from that show and content to just go out and do the same show. I admire them. I couldn't do that.
Why?
What?
Why couldn't you do that?
Well, because it would become autopilot and I'd lose focus. Even in my career, I want to say I went through 4 shows, and each one I rode 5 to 10 years. So you start with an idea, you create a show, and the first year you go from an idea to a show that works every time. The second year, the show every time is a killer every time, and then you can ride that horse for 5 to 10 years. And then I get tired of that and start something different.
And are the shows set and scripted? Are they changing a lot? So you keep yourself. You sound like someone who wants to keep things risky. To keep the being on your toes.
Sit on the street, learn from Dale the unicycle, learn from Jean-Michel the 9-foot unicycle. That was one phase of my career. From a guy, Joel Salome, everybody knows him. I got the idea of standing on milk crates, developed the show around a pile of crates. That lasted another 10, 15 years.
It's a great show.
What?
It's a
Yeah,
great.
look, but it was again, but it was the concept of just me entertaining people, the gift of gab chat and having fun, the quick comeback, all that stuff. Then I was getting a bit long in the tooth, thinking, what should I do? And together with a friend of mine, Dino, came up the idea of what old men do. They drink whiskey. Well, bloody, from whiskey bottles and boxes, you can do all the same juggling, cigar boxes, juggling, whatever. This year at the Clinus Fest, I didn't want to get on the unicycle, so the finale was I took 3 whiskey bottles, put a wick in the top, and they became 3 Molotov cocktails. And so juggling 3 flaming whiskey bottles, which at the end of the day is just juggling 3 glass bottles.
But if you drop them.
Yeah, but of course there's not real whiskey in there. And if you drop, there's a bit of broken glass on the stage. So what? It happens. Shit happens. But so then I got into this whole whiskey, and the main thing is the Scarbox. You know the Scarbox herringbone balance? We go up, 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 up.
No, but please continue.
What?
I don't know, but please continue.
The cigar box routine where you get whatever 9 or 13 cigar boxes.
Yes, I do.
Piles, and you put it together, and then most people balance it on the chin. You can do that with whiskey boxes as well, but instead of balancing on my chin, I then got a bottle of whiskey on top. And you're risking expensive whiskey. Well, whiskey just became a prop. It was the best thing about that show. I could write all my whiskey off as a tax deduction. So by 25 liters of whiskey, it's props for a show. So that was just nice. So then the whiskey show got me through a while. Did a variety shows I was doing for the last 5 years or so. See, I just keep trying. Like, you do a show, and after 5 to 10 years, I get bored, and then you do something else. So I'm not as creative as the people I look up to, who every couple of years come up with an amazing show. But I haven't done the same show my whole career either. So that's kept it interesting.
You've changed and moved through things.
Yeah.
It said before that you like to feel a bit of risk, and I had the feeling that you were someone that wanted the show to keep you on your toes. I'm not so sure of that now. So when you're performing, do you like to put hurdles in front of you to make your life difficult so that the audience sees you go through those troubles? You intentionally stifle.
I'm always going to drop. I'm always going to have to deal with drops. And what I love about audience is the audience interaction. You never know what an audience is going to say, do, react. So yeah, of course you plant the open things and then see how the audience reacts, and then that gives you something to play with. And if it's something funny, then you try to plant that thing again. And that became the art of scripting into your show. How do you leave the opening open and create it that somebody's bound to do X so that you can do Y? But
then isn't the excitement that they're bound to do that? But they might not. They might do something completely different. And then we're into uncharted territory here.
Look, it's also the framework of the show. I think one of the things I knew a show got too old when I was doing it autopilot. But I've also had, people say, I think like any performer, the fact that every show is so totally different. The structure is a shame. It's funny, like my wife and kids, after a while, they got to see right through it. It's like, oh, Dad, you're doing the same thing. I get it. It's like, yeah, but it's totally new to these people. And just playing on what happens, That's why I got into the emceeing and the performing and going. That's what made my show unpredictable is, anything can happen. Yeah, and that's what I like.
And you said no one could see the future, but I'm still inclined to try and poke you a bit for it. What do you see happening in the future for street art in Europe?
Unfortunately, I see it becoming more and more organized, more and more institutionalized.
Okay.
Well, it's become a proper art form. It's not the laissez-faire batch of unorganized people doing anarchy and chaos on the streets. Cirque art chaos. Even the circus out of Wales, No Fit State Circus, which started with 4 people on the road in an old rickety vehicle and the idea. And look what No Fit State Circus is right now, And so my fear, I guess, is, and because of security and the way the world is going, bubbles, polarization, whatever you want to call it, that it becomes more institutionalized, presented as an art form, arranged venues, arranged times where people come and do. I used to call it theater on the streets, location theater. That what I loved when I began, like I said, street theater, just playing with the elements of the streets, being able to make it happen anywhere, anytime. Yeah, I just don't see the venue for it, but maybe I'm old and, out of touch. And I hope young people just say, well, fuck that, we're going to go do it anyway and make it happen.
This is the thing we chatted about before the interview. I mean, I've got this feeling that it needs to die first. for the people to do what you did, to go out and rediscover it? Because surely there must have been traveling street performers before the 80s in Europe.
Like especially after the past year and a half with Corona, it feels pretty dead right now.
It's close.
I pass down Square regularly and it's empty. You miss them. It hurts. You know?
It's a thing with the horse as well.
It's just that they're out there doing it. And now after a year and a half of this pandemic, and all, like you were saying, all the hoops you have to jump through to try and make it happen in Covent Garden. You know,
well, we're fighting it now. We had a license come in a couple of months ago across Westminster, which is unmanageable license. You can't. I mean, you need proof of address to have a license for a start. Yeah. Many people don't have proof of address. You traveling by a country, you're dropping in a bitty city, you're in the van move. You don't have documentation. You may have insurance that you can provide if you need it, but it's just putting all these hurdles and boundaries in. And one of the things that I'm interested to talk to you about with this, and we've touched upon it through the interview, is people who go through the circus schools who are probably and ostensibly middle class, and that's nothing wrong, and they're living their lives, and it's great for them to do it, but they have the funding to be able to afford to do the circus schools. Maybe the kids just rolling around the streets who learned in the early 80s, the late 70s, some of them couldn't afford to go through a circus school. They still had an avenue. They still had something to push them through. Are they going to be cut out of the equation now? They're going to be sidelined.
We're going to find their calling, because I've seen, without being too generalistic, out of the circus school, a few people who really have that twinkle in their eye, that really have that magic to connect with an audience. And a lot of them were just technical performers that have chosen that as a profession, like dancers in a line of dancers that will never be unique stars on their own. And then you're talking about the other guy with the traffic code. People who are performers, right? People who really want to go out and connect with people, they're going to do that because that's just who they are and what they want to do. And if it's commercially viable, and if it fits in the format of street theater, like you've been mentioning, you know, like we think of the circle shows, I don't know. You know, I love in Amsterdam, there's a guy here who has a boat with a whole one-man band on it. And on nice days, he'll float around the canals and he'll play his songs at the bridges and put his shoe up and collect his money like that. And it's bloody brilliant. He'll find his calling. People who are really performers will find a way to perform, you know? And as far as what's happening on the street, hopefully people find new, unique, you know, it might be even organized chaos. So yeah, you have to go through the bureau and the admin of getting a permit, but then you go out and make the chaos happen. But the one guy on the street with the suitcase like we had in the 80s, yeah, it's just not the time. We're not in the 1980s anymore. We're in the, 2020s.
It feels like that. Do you think that part of this isn't undeserved for the street performance community? Do you think we've brought it upon ourselves in some way?
No.
You don't think loud amps, the increasing accessibility?
Progression that's never... it's a natural transition progression that'll always grow and change. We haven't brought it amongst ourselves. There's a dynamic that's happened in and amongst itself that's led to where we are today, and that dynamic will continue into the future.
So did you see the
transient people learning to survive on the edges of society, learning to live alternative lives? What I found in my street theater days and also my performing days is how many of those people are people who choose not to live within the structured format that society demands. And that's one of the red lines that keeps us all together, is we're all creative people saying, no, we're not going to live our life the way everybody else tells us to live our life. We're going to live on the edge, and we're going to go do what you're told not or to do. And yeah, some days we'll be rich, and some days we'll be broke, but it doesn't matter, because at least we're living our lives and we're doing what we want to do. And so I think for street theater, it's the same. There will always be people going out on a street corner. And I think there'll always be people going on a street corner that somebody is going to see them one day and say, can I speak with you for a second? And before you know it, taken off and put them on the telly or put them into some other thing where they become a big name. You know, back in our days, it was Robin Williams, I think Eddie Izzard.
Eddie Izzard was a Covent Garden guy. He was a rep in Covent Garden. He set up the first constitution kind of thing we have as the SPA.
Yeah, and so I think people that are real talent might go out on the street and sparkle and catch the eye of somebody, and fate, if it's meant to be, then they'll grow from the streets into the profession of entertainment, like we've done.
Yeah, so you think that these people are going to find a route. If the street closes down and it becomes inaccessible to people who want to travel around and be outside of society, if it becomes only for the squares, so to speak, they'll find a different venue. You think that they'll find a different way?
I'm thinking right now, necessity is the mother of invention. And if I was young and broke right now, and I couldn't go to the streets to perform, and with lockdown, I'd be like, well, wait, let's go to the park and just make some sort of impromptu something happening in the park. You know, let's go find where there are people now. That one of the shows back in the day called The Blitz, Rusty and Shiko and Rusty, Zurich, Bahnhof, late 80s, early 90s, a gold mine, but totally illegal to perform, all right?
Right.
And they had this show where the two of them wearing suits and ties, Zurich, Bahnhof, right, would pull a black nylon over the face and go into a slow motion fight. And it lasted 8 to 10 minutes. And there was somebody on the lookout for them, that if the coppers were coming, they just pulled the black mask, they would suit and tie, and they just walked on, and there was nothing happening. But it was like an 8-minute show that they could do, I don't know how many times, 10, 20 times a day.
See, this is what I'm excited about.
You know?
Although, you know, maybe now with cameras, it's a little more difficult to do that kind of stuff, but the people ducking and diving, I mean, this new influx of regulation and limiting might end up in these really creative, interesting hit and run tactics, or, you know.
You gotta go where the people are. That's what I like about the streets. People don't come to you. What I loved about the streets is you get people who aren't out for a night's entertainment. You catch their attention. You entertain them enough that they stay, and in the end, they get unexpected and nice entertainment. You know, and so these days, when the city squares seem to be closed down, and everybody is out in nature and public parks, it's coming up with the concept of an idea that you get people at a park on a Sunday afternoon, and you do your little thingy, and you entertain them, and you pass your hat, and you do it right out of it. You know, and you got to go where the people are.
Yeah, definitely.
The times that, you know, the coppers come in, of course, you get the audience on your side. Because the people are having fun, like, come on, come on.
Definitely, you know. And
that's why when you were talking before about the typical English act that's just repeating what's been done before, sorry, I don't mean to be generalization.
I'm worse for this. I think street performance, at least from what I can see in the UK, majority of the work I see in the UK, I don't see a lot of festival work. I see a lot of street work. I look at a lot of street pictures. I go to Edinburgh every year, watch all the street shows there. I don't see creative, interesting Mindbox Studios. Much love, old friend. That's Les, I believe. I think it is Les. I might be wrong. If it is, I'm very sorry.
I don't know what it is.
We'll find out for you after. I believe Les.
No,
I think.
what I was going to say is my thing right now to people that are out doing the streets trying to earn a living, right? Instead of walking down the existing avenues, going where everybody's always gone, doing the shows everybody's done, go try new locations where there's people but nobody's ever performed before. Come up with a concept or an idea or a character that fits those locations. Have fun with people. You know, one of the things I want to get in here, Kevin Brookings was one of my early mentors, and he wrote this article once about how doing a street throw was back in the old days, people gathered around a campfire, okay? And then modern electricity, the television become the modern day campfire. Everybody at the end of the day gathers around the warmth and the glow of the campfire, right? And what does street theater do? It begins with a match, right? You just light a match and you get 1 or 2 people looking at what you're doing. You start having a little bit of fun. And instead of looking at a few more others, and you can throw some twigs on, right? And then you got the interest and the fire's starting to go and you got a good edge and the show's happening and you can throw the logs on, right? And then you got a nice show and it's all happening. And then you got this really good bonfire that ends in a huge burst of spectacle. Thank you very much. You pass your hat and it all dissipates into nothing. And
comedians
did a video of this for the promo back in the day in front of the Sydney Opera House, where from on top of the Opera House, they did a time lapse of a show of chaos, 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 them showing up, ding, 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 edge growing, ding, 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 show, boom, and it blows in the middle and it goes back and it's just the way it was 45 minutes earlier. And that's what I loved about street theater, just making the magic happen anywhere. That's why, I mean, I get really close to the end, but, you know, young performers out there, you got to go do that. Just go to places where the people are and they're not expecting to be entertained. And if you can entertain them there, you can entertain them everywhere.
There's a weird thing nowadays when you say about the young people. So there's no artifice with street performance. It's disappeared. There's no artifice. Video artifice. Like video would be, if I'm using the term right, it's something that can store and hold something, right? It's a relic that's left on after it. So when you do the comedy gig, you have the DVD, the recording, the comedy gig. That's the kind of artifice of the comedy gig. Something that's left behind. The thing that will keep that information being used for a long time. Street jobs look crap on camera. You can't film them. You can't capture the nature and the atmosphere. They live and then they die within the time you perform them, and after that, they're gone.
I agree 100%. I mean, that's why I've never made the jump to television, film. That's what I mean. I barely watch videos as long as I've been on chat. Because what I did, it was always the magic of live entertainment, of being with people. You know, and it never comes across in video as good as it does in real life, what I've done.
When you're in jeopardy, in that moment, there's the tension. No one knows what's going to happen. You're involved in it. You're in, you know, you're inside the piece.
You catch these people within your energy field, within your aura, whatever you want to call it, and yeah, that's you emit that energy, and they come in, and it happens in that space. I mean, but I think it's the same with proper theater. I'm not theatrically educated, but I'm sure all the operas and the ballets and the really good theater pieces, that's what it's about. It's the communal experience.
They don't work as well. They work in the streets.
Individuals, take a group of individuals who become one for that half hour, and then they all become individuals again.
In that moment.
Oh, Rex is saying something.
Great stuff. Thanks for sharing your stories, Lee. I've really enjoyed listening.
Oh, cheers, Rex. Nice to see you, man.
Very regular viewer. We are reaching the last 8 minutes now. So usually I say, would you like to give me some advice for new buskers? But I think you've been quite complete with that. As we've talked, you've been really amazing advice, really interesting stuff, really valuable, really, really happy to have this inside the archive. So I suppose that the last thing for the last 8 minutes, you've met a lot of people on your way. You've known a lot of people in your life, and you've described yourself as someone who's networked with them and been really a family with a lot of them. What do you have to say for all of the people you've lived your life with, the people you've had adventures with in the way?
What do I have to say to them?
Yeah, if they're watching now, if they see this video, if for some reason they watch, what would you say to them?
I haven't got a bloody clue. Look, I mean, one of the things I love about being a performer is the situations you end up in and the people you meet. And especially street theaters, there's a lot of really unique individual souls out there with some amazing, creative, unique ideas. Like I said a few minutes ago, they don't follow the standard paths in life. They look for creative, alternative solutions. You know, if the system says do it like this, they look for ways outside of the system to do it. And that's what I've enjoyed about all the people I've met along the way. They haven't been standard thinking. They think outside the box. They do things differently. They do things creatively. They do things that the system says, hey, let's just do D. You know, and I think that fits for almost all my good friends I've made through performing. And yeah, they become my friends for life. You know, which is that's when you're asking even in the early days. The people that Rex, we hung out back in the early 80s. I don't know when Rex came to you. Late 80s maybe? Early 90s before he came over?
Mid 80s, I think it was. I'm sure we can put in there.
I'm pretty sure Rex came over and did Orange Bowl back in the day as well. See, I forget. Oh, Lee Ross is out there. Man, Lee. Should I end with a really good story about Lee Ross? Just because you watched up there?
Please.
We did the Lee and Lee show for a while out in Australia. And, yeah, we worked together really well. And I just learned how to do balloon animals. And we were doing a duo show together, and it was time to do the balloon animal, and I blew up the balloon animal and just passed out and fell boom. And I remember this like strange semi thing about, wouldn't it be amazing to be lying your back in the grass in the middle of a field, and there's just hundreds of people around you laughing their head off? Wouldn't this be paradise? And I open my eyes, and there I am lying on a piece of grass in the middle of a field, and there's hundreds of people just laughing their heads off, and I have no idea what's going on. And I got up and I put my head between my knees because I knew the next thing in the show was going from the 6 to the 9-foot unicycle. Right? And I just passed out. So it's like, let's just keep this together. And went on and we did the show. And we're having it at the end. And he's there and I'm here. And somebody comes up to me and says, man, that blackout was bloody amazing the way he played that. Was that real or what happened there? I said, what are you talking about? I was like, what? Lee, what happened? He goes, oh, yeah, you passed out. I kept the show going until you came to again. You know? So I passed out in the middle of the show, and I'll never forget that show together with Lee. That was bloody brilliant.
And it's quite a jeopardy after passing out, going and doing the high unicycle. I mean, I do quite high rope, and it scares me every time I'm up there.
You know your routines. You know you're doing. You focus. You get on. This street performers in general don't get sick. If you're a sick-prone person, you're not going to survive in this profession. End of the day, no matter how you feel, when your moment's on, you get it. And this is what I didn't know when I started on the streets that I learned later, becoming a professional, is when it's time to go on stage, and you do what you do, because that's your job. Whereas in the beginning, I just went out on the street corner and didn't have a clue what I was doing. So, yeah. It all just kind of happened.
When you say go out there and just do your job, one of the things that I find challenging for doing festivals and stuff like that is not taking the chances, not playing with something that could go horribly wrong, but also could be fucking amazing.
Right.
Do you have the same thing there? You know, I could talk to this lady and she could fucking destroy everything.
There are certain moments when you don't take the risk. But I guess what you were saying earlier, I think for myself, I was a bit of in, what do you call it? Ongeleide projectiel. I was a ricochet bullet. Unpredictable. You never knew where I was going. I wasn't as crazy as others. I mean, I love, again, Lee. You know, there were certain people who had predictable chaos. And I think there were certain things in myself, because I'm the way I am, you never really knew which way it was going. And that's what kept people on their edge. So even when you were doing gigs, I would still just go out and be myself. You know, it's one of the things, like I said, the Cappuccino taught me, and with auditions, all you can do is go out and be yourself, be true to yourself. And if the character's strong, you'll be a success. But you got to be yourself. You got to go out and, you know, you got to be true. That's why I've never been an actor. I can't play other characters. I can only play Lee Hayes, because I am myself. You know, so I'm not really an actor. I'm an entertainer again. You know, you give me a script with lines, I'm probably bloody horrible. But we'll see. You're muted again.
Yeah, sorry. There's a guy moving his boat here, so I'm trying to keep out exterior sound. One of the things you find, I've completely lost my train of thought there. Please carry on.
No, I don't know. I was pretty much done with that one.
I say the boat moving here almost struck my boat, and it did take a tad of my focus.
It's okay. It's okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, we've covered all we had. The people, the situations. Again, what I really loved about performing is it brought me to all the corners of the world, and in situations you normally just don't come in life. And it's made it really interesting.
You see, in street performance for years meant in that moment of me going, what the fuck am I talking about? You could instantly turn around in that situation and pivot on your feet and say something, yes?
I just keep going. I'm a good talker like yourself. People who know me will know that. It's nice to see people actually watch these things, because I'll be honest, I don't watch videos, so I don't watch
I can understand, but we have quite a lot of the community watchers. A lot of the old guys check in. They don't all watch live, but throughout the next week, if it's like what it was like before I got ill, you'll get, a good portion of the old school. Check out the video.
What I really miss the most, and for all the people out there, is back when we started, everybody traveling in vans. We knew where each other parked up. There was this whole circle of friends that grew, and that's normal in your 20s to your 30s, right? And then all of us have found different places in the world where we've settled in, different lives, and we see each other way less. There's little contact these days thanks to social media, but just running into friends as regularly as we used to do. It's a shame that doesn't happen, but the connections are always there.
Well, that's the thing with the international community.
I haven't seen them in 10 years. If I'm in the city they live in, I can give them a call. Well, it's still there. Yeah. But it's a shame but that's the way life goes.
Have you ever thought about, as being a promoter, organising a kind of reunion, an Expendables for, the Stallone action movie?
Hey, if I ever won the lottery, I'd throw together one hell of a party and just fly everybody in. But I've also had this thing a bit morbid about the what is it called? The complete life. That without getting too deep into it, the whole idea, there's a lot of people walking around in this earth, and we're all getting a whole lot older, so there's a lot more older people around. And if you decide when you've had a completed life 10, 15 years in advance, you can plan your life towards that day. And the last day, you spend the last of your pennies, you fly all your friends together, you throw an amazing party, and then the next day, everybody knows you're just going to the hospital, getting a shot, and checking out. If you could plan your finances so I could spend the last night of my life, I just spend the last pennies I had to bring all these people together. You know?
A world envisaged by an author called Michael Hubeck. He talks a lot about science in the modern age and the fact that sooner or later we might just have to decide to kill ourselves because we're going to live that long that we won't want to be alive.
There already. It's out there. There's a movement that's starting around of the completed life. It's out there.
Well,
I'm going to end on anything morbid like that. It's just nice to see that old friends are still out there watching and in touch. And it's good that the network, the Brotherhood of Street Performers still stays around. You know?
yeah.
Remember the competitiveness you mentioned in the beginning. To me, it was always a brotherhood and friends and hung out. We helped each other. We supported each other. We lived together. You slept on each other's couches. You know, we were always colleagues. We were never competitors.
Yeah.
Everybody had their half-hour shot. You do what you can do. Some were better than others. We always, you know, what you were saying about these days that it's so organized. It used to be anybody could show up and get a half-hour shot. And if the show was shit, well, that's your right to go out and be shit because, you know, we all got to go through that.
You'll get better.
Make mistakes. Exactly.
Yeah. Lee, it's been an absolute pleasure. We're a little over now. It's been a joy talking to you. It's been an absolute. Everyone says it flies by. It's been an absolute joy. It has. I found it fascinating, informative. Your passion for the art form shines through, even though you haven't performed for many years by this time. It sounds you still can tell. What's that? Well, it's true.
It's not that long ago. Don't rub me off yet.
You talked about slowly tooling down and this idea of a full life, and you know, I can still tell that you love it, and that's great. And it's been a pleasure to listen to you talk for 2 hours to do it. Thank you, really. Thank you, Lee. Everyone else who's been watching, guys, thank you for joining us back again. It is back every Wednesday. We will be interviewing another person with their living history of street performance. If you can, visit the Patreon, support the project if you're able to. Otherwise, guys, if you comment, like, share, it helps the archive get out to more people, and that's really helpful for everybody involved. Have a lovely day, everyone. Thank you for your time. Good night.